the companions behind the scenes would gather together. They had a nickname which they gave to wine. And the nickname which they gave to wine, which they received from the Imams, was Abd al-Nur, or servant of the light. And they would gather together and they would partake in a brotherly ritual, and they would consume alcohol. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الإمام المهديين وسلم تسليما السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. My dear brother Guillaume.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my father.
It's so good to have you here.
It's good to be here, thank you.
So today we want to talk about a sensitive topic, but it really shouldn't be sensitive. No topic should be taboo when it comes to religion. And that is the topic about the permissibility of alcohol, wines and other than wine. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it permissible? Is it not permissible? And in order to answer that question, we have to look through all of the three religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and take a journey down the line of the prophets and the messengers from Adam's time all the way till today, and highlight the Torah, the New Testament, the Bible, and the Quran.
Yes.
Now, we know that there's a difference of opinion now between these three religions when it comes to alcohol. In Judaism and in Christianity, it's permissible to drink. But in Islam, it's totally not permissible, and Muslims have a very negative view towards alcohol. But why is this the case? One, the Quran, it validates the previous books, as we have stated in so many episodes before. When we go look at the history of alcohol, starting from the time of Adam all the way down, we find that the source of wine and alcohol is the fermented fruits, right? Mm-hmm. And so in the beginning, God gave these plants, as we stated in the last episode, those plants which have fruits that have seeds in them for Adam and his children to use and to consume in whichever way that they saw fit. He didn't place limitations on them. And so Adam, it was made permissible. And there was no law that was brought down to Adam in the beginning that stated that he should not drink. The only things that were told to Adam in the very beginning was that he should not approach the tree and that he should be fruitful and multiply. There were no other commandments that were given to him. We find then in Genesis, later on, in Ulil Azm prophet, the first of the Ulil Azm prophets, Noah, we find that he is, after the ark, safely lands after the flood, and docks. We find that Noah begins to create wine, and we find that he becomes drunk actually off of wine in one account, and he passes out in front of his children, and it states that one of them sees their father's nakedness, which this is a whole nother topic to explain later. But the point is that we do have documented in the Hebrew Bible that an Ulil Azm prophet, and that was Noah, was consuming wine and becoming drunk. So he was consuming it, and all the way to the point of being totally intoxicated by it.
Yes.
We find later on in the Bible, we find that Abraham is meeting with a high priest of the Lord, and that is Melchizedek. And Melchizedek it seems to be the Hujjah over Abraham, and he actually anoints Abraham. And at one point when he's with Abraham, he brings forward some food and some wine, so that him and Abraham can have it. And so Abraham partakes in the drinking of wine as well. We also have in the Hebrew Bible that Lot, the relative of Abraham, and who was living with him at the same time, and Abraham's vicegerent, we find that he also, in an incident, is given wine to drink by his daughters, and he partakes in that on two consecutive nights. We find later on that with the coming of another Ulil Azm prophet, and that is Moses, that it is actually his jurisprudence permits openly the consumption of wine, and actually wine in some of the jurisprudence is acceptable as an offering to the Lord. And we find that a whole series of prophets and messengers that came after Moses, they also partook in the consumption of wine. They praised wine. They wrote songs about wine, like Solomon, like David. And in almost every single prophet's writings that came after Moses from the Bani Israel, we find that each and every one of them mentions wine. Almost each and every one of them mentions wine in some way, shape, or form. We have Isaiah, his book mentions wine. We have Nehemiah, his book mentions wine. Zechariah's book mentions wine. Haggai's book mentions wine. Zephaniah mentions wine. And so you can't escape this reality of the existence of wine on the tongues of the prophets and the messengers. They partook in it. They drank from it. They didn't consider it ever at any moment in time to be prohibited, although they did recognize that there were some negative aspects to it. This is something that they did recognize. And there are words from the prophets and the messengers like Isaiah and other than them that would condemn people whose sole purpose was to wake up early in the morning in order that they go find a drink and that they remain in a drunken stupor the whole time. We do also find that the Israelites, when they would make a nazr, a promise to God, or in order to do something, to sacrifice something in order to get closer to God, or to give a promise in order that another thing that they wants be fulfilled by God. Now, this is called a nazr in both Judaism and Islam. We find that sometimes their nazr would be that they would abstain from alcohol or from wine or not drink it for their entire life. And for alcohol, then, within Judaism and Christianity, was a substance that was never prohibited. It was permissible, and the prophets and the messengers did partake in it, and they partook in it to such a degree that sometimes they would become drunk. But at the same time, it was not something that every Israelite had to partake in. And there was a conscious awareness of the fact that, people did behave or could become addicted to it or could behave sometimes in a way that is contrary to what God likes. And we find also that God, at the time of Moses, we have Aaron, for example, who is a priest, and he's required, to go inside in the tent meeting, the meeting of the tent, and that's the area where the Spirit of the Lord would dwell. So they had this tent set up, and in the tent they had the Ark of the Covenant, and that's where the Spirit would dwell. Not everybody could go inside this area. It was kind of forbidden or haram that any of the normal Israelites go in. Only people whom God had specifically gave permission to, a priest who was divinely appointed by him, could approach. And God tells Aaron, and he makes it very clear that Aaron can never drink wine when he's in the presence of God. When he enters into the tent, he can never be in a state where he had drunk wine, because God says then it would cloud his judgment. He would not be able to tell the clean from the unclean, the holy from the unholy. So while God permitted it as something that the Israelites could partake in, and every other prophet that came before them, they could never be in the presence of God while they were intoxicated or while they had consumed this drink.
Yes.
Okay?
That's clear.
It's very clear. Now we come to Christianity, and we have Jesus, and Jesus is known. He's actually really famous for his relationship with wine.
Mm-hmm.
And you grew up as a Christian, right?
Yes.
What
right.
denomination were you?
Catholic.
Catholic?
Yes.
And you went to church regularly?
We went to church, and in the church they even give you wine to, not to the kids, but to the adults. They give you.
Wow, they give you wine in the church, actually.
Yes.
Okay, let's hold on. Let's have you tell the audience now, what are the incidents that are mentioned in the New Testament that involve Jesus and wine?
So yes, we see that in the New Testament, one of the first miracle, or even the first miracle recorded in the Gospel from Jesus, is when he transformed the water into wine. And it happened in a wedding where it's not just one glass of wine, but the people have drank the whole lot of wine that was available. And then they ask Jesus they say, oh, we don't have wine anymore. His mother, alayhi salam, she asked him to do something. And then Jesus Christ, peace is from him, he tells his disciple to go and to bring the water. And then he transformed the water into wine.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yes.
So there's a big wedding happening. The people
Yes.
are partying, they're in good spirits, they're having fun, they're laughing, they're drinking together, they're celebrating
Yes.
this marriage that's taken place. But they run out of wine. And Jesus doesn't want that the party ends. He wants that this good mood continue and the festivities continue for the night. And he does this.
Yes.
Okay, wow. Okay, so what's the next incident?
So for sure the end. So that was the beginning of his ministry, and at the end of his ministry, we find again this supper where he is with this disciple, and it's called the Last Supper. And so it's recorded in the gospel, in the known gospel, the canonical gospel, as let's say it was a meal, and Jesus take the bread and the wine, which are the symbols, or today, as he says, that the bread is his body and the wine is his blood. So they are the symbol, if we just read it in the apparent, just the symbol as the body and the blood of Christ. And so he break the bread, he gives it to his disciples, and he drink the wine, and he passed the wine to all his disciples. So yeah, they were drinking with Jesus. So it's not something that seems
okay,
to be...
so his ministry starts off, like you mentioned, with an incident where Jesus is, partaking in wine and serving it, and his ministry ends also with him drinking with his disciples wine.
Yes.
Okay, and then from that, the Catholics they continue carrying on this ritual, right?
Yes. So every day actually they do that. And every Sunday, at least, they have this whole community mass where they come, and everybody is invited to take this small bread, which is the body of Christ, and to drink a bit of wine. It's not like getting drunk, but they have this, it's like a ceremony. So wine is something sacred, actually. Okay,
so now wine basically transforms from Judaism in Christianity to becoming a part of a ritual, to be becoming part of a prayer, right?
Yes.
And it becomes a very vital and important part of the faith.
Yes.
And then we have in Islam, we have a prohibition that takes place, okay? And what happens in the time period of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam does not match at all what takes place from Adam's time all the way down. Muhammad's prohibition of alcohol is so out of the ordinary for what has taken place before. And I think Muslims get this confused. And most Muslims, they just automatically assume that because God made it haram for Muslims and for Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then therefore, if it was part of Muhammad's haram, then it must have been haram for all of the prophets and the messengers. And they come to this conclusion for a couple reasons. Because wine, alcohol is described as being an impurity, okay, something which is impure,
yes.
And it's likened to the flesh of swine, okay, or the consumption of the pig.
Yes.
And so they say to themselves, and the scholars, they come to their conclusions. They ponder over things and they just add their own thoughts on top of things. So they say, okay, well, if it's an impurity and the prophets and the messengers are pure, then they would have never consumed it. And because also they know from verses in the Quran that state that there were corruptions that took place in the Bible and in the New Testament, so they automatically assume that anything that states that a prophet or a messenger engaged in the drinking of alcohol, that this would have been a corruption.
So they deny the whole evidences of the whole
they
story.
deny all of the evidence, and it is way too much and way too frequent to deny. And when a person looks at it, the evidence actually piles up so strongly, and it's really kind of hard to make that case that every place where the prophets and the messengers we're drinking wine, that it was a corruption, for the simple fact that one, archaeology is against that, and the archaeological evidence and historical evidence proves that these ancient Israelites and the people that were following these religions in the past, they actually were consuming alcohol. These communities they didn't forbid it during those time periods.
Yes.
And also the frequency of it being in the text. You would have to deny gigantic portions of the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament. You'd have to rewrite the entire thing now for it to even make sense, because there's poetry that's involved. And when you take out the wine, then you'd have to take out the whole sentence, and you'd have to restructure the entire, you'd have to rewrite basically the Bible, and it wouldn't really make sense. And there are other reasons that we're going to come to in Islam why that is an incorrect conclusion that the non-working scholars reached. But first, let's explore what happened. During the life of the Prophet Muhammad, initially, it's not forbidden. And there are followers that are existing. There's people, fellow Arabs and non-Arabs that are in the region, Jews also, and they are consuming alcohol. And they are followers of Abrahamic faiths. They are followers of the Abrahamic religion, Din al-Hanif. And you also have Christians that are existing at the same time period, and you also have Jews that are existing at the same time period. It was a normal thing to consume alcohol, but things were getting out of control. And there was a lot of prostitution that was going on, and the Arabs were in a state of complete ignorance, and there was a lot of tribal warfare that was taking place between them. And there were killings that were taking place, and they were even murdering their own daughters. So their thinking was very basic. It was very archaic. And they were worshiping idols that were made out of sticks and stones. And many of them would be constantly in a state of drunkenness. Rarely would you see these individuals sober. Many of them would not even be sober long enough to even understand what their fellow family members were trying to tell them, let alone comprehend the message that the Prophet Muhammad came with. And it is even recorded that they would come to prayer in a state of drunkenness. So even the people that accepted Islam, they would come to the mosque and they would pray behind the Prophet Muhammad while they were drunk. And for that reason, the verse came down which says, "And do not approach prayer while you are drunk." One could read another reason behind this verse, and we know that every verse in the Quran has up to 70 meanings according to one tradition. Yes. And in reality, there's infinite meanings that could be extracted from the words of God. And so we do know that the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, in the traditions, they said, "And we are the prayer." Meaning the Ahlul Bayt, the proofs of God, are the prayer. Yes. Ahmad al-Hassan said, Imam al-Mahdi is the Fajr prayer. He's the true meaning. The true meaning behind upholding the prayers is the wilayah of Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. This is what the Imams stated. Yes. And so the person who prays the physical prayer but does not know the Imam of his time, does not have wilayah, he does not have a prayer that's accepted. And a person who doesn't physically pray, but has the wilayah of Muhammad and the family of Muhammad, he takes them as their guide, as their imam, then this is a true believer, even if he doesn't pray, right? Because the imam said that there's the wilayah of Ali ibn Abi Talib and his sons is a good deed that no bad deed could harm. And the wilayah of his enemies, to take his enemies as imams, is a bad deed that no good deed could benefit. So if you're taking a false imam as a guide and you're following them, no matter how much you pray, no matter how much you give zakat, no matter how much you make pilgrimage, it will never benefit you. And so Imam al-Mahdi, he is the Fajr prayer. And each one of the Mahdis is a prayer from the prayers. That's the true meaning behind it. And so if we take this meaning that Muhammad and the family of Muhammad, their wilayah, themselves are the true prayers, and apply it to that verse, then do not approach prayer while you are intoxicated. All of a sudden it becomes what? It becomes, don't approach the Prophet Muhammad while you are intoxicated. That this is the sin. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was God in creation. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was the perfect manifestation of the divine traits and characteristics of God. He was the walking Quran. Muhammad was the perfect, most complete human being and the perfect caliph of God. His walking around was the walking around of God. Him coming and going was the coming and going of God. Him speaking was the speech of God, because Muhammad, according to all Muslims, does not speak from his own self. Even the Quran testifies. So anything that comes out of his mouth is a constant divine inspiration. And so therefore, it makes sense now, and it's actually not a different ruling. It's the same ruling, that just like God told Aaron before that he could never go into the tent of the meeting, right, and be in the presence of the Spirit of God while he had drunk or been in a state of intoxication or even had a sip of the wine, the same thing would apply over here, that the walking ark of the covenant and certainly the body and the flesh of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his heart are more holy and a holier place for the will of God to manifest in the Spirit of God to speak from than the ark of the covenant. Then it also would have been equally haram, if not more haram, to be around the Prophet Muhammad, which is the walking Spirit of God and the walking Ark of the Covenant. It would have been forbidden for people to be in his presence while they are in a state of intoxication. Why? Because over here God told Aaron that if he did so, he would be clouded. He wouldn't be able to tell the holy from the unholy. Same thing over here. If they're drunk and the prophet's giving them a commandment, they might think that something that he's saying is evil when really it's holy. And if Aaron would have walked into the tent while he was in a state of drunkenness, he could have also thought that an encounter, a voice, a command from God to him, he could have perceived it as an evil one rather than a holy one. And so he could have gotten confused. Same thing over here. So in order that they receive the word of the Prophet Muhammad, or the word of God through him, they cannot approach prayer. They cannot approach God. They cannot approach the Prophet while they are intoxicated. And so this prohibition was put into place. And during the life of the Prophet Muhammad, none of the Muslims were allowed to consume alcohol. They couldn't do it. It was forbidden. Just like the prohibition that took place in America, where you had in the beginning, they were all drinking and they came from Europe and they'd been drinking normally for many years before that. And then a certain time period comes where society over there deemed that the behavior of the human beings while they were on this substance was not beneficial to society as a whole. And so they have to stop it. They have to control it. Same thing happens over here. All from the times of the prophets and the messengers. They're using it in the time of the Prophet Muhammad. The ignorance is huge, and the Prophet Muhammad is great, and there's a great message that needs to be delivered to a people whom cannot handle it. And so they have to, that prohibition has to be put into place.
Okay.
But does this prohibition last forever? Does this prohibition last for all times? And is wine evil by nature or unclean and impure by nature? For that, we cannot take the words of the scholars for it. We don't want to hear anything that they have to say if they're not appointed by God. What we need to do is to ask Muhammad and the family of Muhammad about wine. And that's exactly what we do when we go to their narrations. And what we find in there is something extremely interesting. One, we find that in paradise, God creates as a reward rivers of honey, rivers of milk, and rivers of wine. Yes. And so in this place, heaven, in which there is no evil, only purity exists. There's no impurity that is there. We find that wine is in that place of purity. And some people might say, oh, but it's just allegorical. It's not real physical wine that's over there. Well, they haven't been to heaven to give us this conclusion, have they? Yes. You know, we got to go off of just the words of God and the words of Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. And even if it was allegorical and it wasn't physical rivers of wine, if wine was something that was evil, then God wouldn't use it as an allegory for something else which is in heaven, would he? Mm-hmm. You know, we don't hear him using swine as an allegory. We don't use him. We don't have him using other unclean things. Yes. And we find also, so that's something which is really important, is that in the hereafter you have this river of wine that's over there, and it's like a reward for people. But another thing, Guillaume, is that Muhammad and the family of Muhammad, in their hadiths that they have with their close companions, they actually reveal that there is another meaning behind the verses that mention wine in the Quran. And that wine is a code word for something else. When the Quran is speaking about wine, and when it's forbidding wine from the people, when it's claiming that wine is an impurity or unclean, it's not even talking about wine. Imam al-Sadiq and the Imams from the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, they say that the true meaning, just like the true meaning behind prayer, is the Imams of guidance, that wine and swine and those things which are mentioned in gambling, those things that are mentioned as being from the shaitan, those things are actually allegories, code words for the Imams of misguidance. Mm-hmm. They're code words for the Pharaoh and the Nimrod and the Haman of the time of the Prophet Muhammad. They are code words for Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman and the enemies of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. And there's a verse from the Quran which states, this is an example that I'll just give you to clarify to you this fact. So there's a hadith from the Ahlul Bayt which is doing an interpretation. The Imam is interpreting a verse from the Quran, which states, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَحَبَّبَ إِلَيْكُمُ الْإِيمَانُ وَزَيَّنَهُ فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ. And He made beloved to you faith and adorned it in your hearts. وَكَرَّهَ إِلَيْكُمْ الْكُفْرِ وَالْفُسُوقِ وَالْعُصْيَانِ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الرَّاشِدُونَ. And He made hateful for you disbelief and immorality and disobedience. Those are the Rashidun. Rashidun means rightly guided. Rightly guided is a word, Rashidun, which is used to describe the Khulafa, the four rightly guided caliphs after the Prophet Muhammad, which is Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali ibn Abi Talib. So what the Imam does here is he says that the real interpretation of the verse is that these four things, Iman, faith, Kufr, disbelief, Fusuq, immorality, and Asyan, which is disobedience, that these four things are actually code words for the four rightly guided caliphs. And that faith is Ali ibn Abi Talib.
Yes.
Kufr, disbelief, is Abu Bakr. Right? And Bakr and Kufr, they kind of have the same amount of letters and they resemble each other. The Umar, which they call Umar al-Faruq,
yes.
Here they're saying that al-Fusuq is a reference to Umar and Asyan is a reference to Uthman. Okay? So Ali ibn Abi Talib is faith, Abu Bakr is disbelief, Umar is immorality, and Uthman is disobedience.
From Abdurrahman ibn Umar, from Abu Abdullah, peace and blessing upon him, on God saying, Allah has made beloved to you faith and adorned it in your heart. Meaning the Prince of the believers, peace and blessing upon him. And has made hateful to you disbelief, immorality, and disobedience. The first and second and third.
And so that changes the entire understanding of the verse. In that same way, in that same fashion, the verses which are talking about the blood, not to consume blood, not to consume wine, not to consume pig, not to gamble, that these are also all allegories for the enemies and the imams of misguidance and the non-working scholars in every day and age. Okay? That yes. They are what is unclean. They are the manifestation of impurity. You take that alongside with the existence, and these hadiths exist, I didn't write them. That's what's present. And we're just investigating them and asking our viewers to investigate, like detectives, to put out the map. The fact that it was always allowed, permissible, from Adam's time until now. And Jesus, and he's really involved in it. And then it becomes prohibited a little bit into the dawah of the Prophet Muhammad. So there was a period where it was allowed, and then it becomes not allowed. But there are also at the same time existing rivers of wine that are in paradise. So how could it be? At the same time that we have hadiths from the Ahl Bayt that are mentioning that, these things are not really talking about your physical wine. It's talking about something else. And that is the scholars of misguidance. And also adding to that, secret Gnostic texts and secret Gnostic sayings from the Ahl Bayt alayhim salam. Each one of the Imams would have these close companions. Prophet Muhammad, Ali ibn Abi Talib, they would have close companions like Abu Dharr, Miqdad, Salman. And one of them was asked one day, what would you do if you saw Ali ibn Abi Talib drinking wine? So a companion that was at the 8th level of faith responds and he says, I would ask him about the halal and the haram. That's what I would do. So if they come and they see the Imam and he's sitting there and he's drinking alcohol, that person who's at that level of faith would say, oh, Ali ibn Abi Talib, I'm not going to disbelieve in you right away, but I have a question. Like, didn't the Prophet say that this was haram? Why are you drinking it? Salman was asked the same question, and he was at a level of 10, and he was from us, Ahl Bayt. And his response was, immediately, I would sit down and I would drink with him. Okay?
Yes.
So he would be in a state of automatic submission. And in this hadith, it also shows that Salman recognizes that alcohol could become permissible again. And Salman recognizes that it is the Imams, the successors of Muhammad, who have the ability to bring it back and make it halal again. And then we find that in the lives of other companions, the lives of the companions that came with the Imams that were the successors of Ali ibn Abi Talib, like in the life of Jabir al-Jafi, who was a companion of Imam al-Baqir, or Mufaddal ibn Umar, who was a companion of Imam al-Baqir and Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, and others. We find that these companions narrate in many traditions that were always kept secret and safeguarded by particular sects in Islam, Shia sects usually, that followed them and didn't follow the masses. And they also didn't make these teachings public for many, many years. They kept them very safeguarded and secret because they knew that they would get a lot of backlash from the larger, wider Muslim community who would accuse them of being disbelievers. These narrations state that the companions behind the scenes would gather together, and that they had a nickname which they gave to wine. And the nickname which they gave to wine, which they received from the Imams, was Abd al-Nur, or servant of the light. This is the name that they gave to wine. And they would gather together and they would partake in a brotherly ritual where, very much like the disciples of Jesus at the Last Supper, they would sit together, they would reminisce about their master, they would think about the Imam of their time, and sometimes it would take place with the Imam of the time, and they would consume alcohol, or drink the Abd al-Nur, or drink the wine together. And in some traditions, maybe the Imam wasn't there, but he would manifest suddenly amongst them after they had drunk the wine. And the Imam would tell them things such as, its meaning would be basically that because they are true Shia, and because they understood, and I'm paraphrasing here and giving you the meaning of these very long traditions, because they reached the state of loving one another like true family, because their hearts became free of hatred, their minds became completed, because their faith had reached the highest level of faith that was possible because they had no envy in their hearts. Abd al-Nur was permissible for them, whereas it's not permissible for the shortcomers, the people who don't really have complete faith or full faith, for those people that their hearts are still filled with hatred and ignorance and envy, and that if they drank the wine, they would fight with one another or it would cause problems. For these people who their intellect is complete, the alcohol has no bad effect on them. It only has a good effect. So the Shia, when the Quran states that wine has in it some benefits, but its harm is more than its benefits, is because all those people that their intellect and their faith is not complete, they would only take from the wine the harm. As to where those who their intellect is complete, like the prophets and the messengers, they would only take from the consumption of the wine that which is beneficial.
Yes.
That which is impure, that which is bad, goes to that which is bad, and that which is impure. The negative things of alcohol will go to the people that have negative things in their hearts, and the people that have positive things in their hearts and that are like children and have full faith, they would receive from the wine or the alcohol that feeling of love, that feeling of bonding, that enlightenment that can occur from the consumption of moderate levels of wine when in the presence of an imam or in the presence of their brothers. And so from these traditions, assuming that now the whole picture and all the information that we have, because there's a lot of these narrations, just like there's a lot of the verses in the Bible. And when we look at it and we assume that, okay, no, there's something to this grand picture, what we find here is that the wine was made forbidden for all those whom were shortcomers, but in reality, behind the scenes, the true Shia were given permission by God to continue to live in a state of paradise and to join the ranks as the previous prophets and messengers, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would never make haram for the believers and companions of Muhammad, something which he made halal for the companions of Jesus and Abraham and Moses and the rest of the prophets and the messengers. And so he grants them this ability to do this, but he tells them, that they must conceal it and be in a state of taqiyya and don't tell the others, because the others are not going to understand it. And the others are going to persecute them for the consumption of alcohol and, basically would call them disbelievers. And finally, we come to the question, and that is, will wine become permissible in the future? And I think that the answer is extremely clear, and it is in absolute yes, that it will be in the time of the Qa'im openly permissible. And the reason for that was already stated in the narrations of Muhammad and the family of Muhammad, for all those who go back to their words and take their words, not the words of the scholars, because the permissibility of wine was part of the Sharia of the former prophets and the messengers, and we have traditions that the scholars know about, spoke about before, that when the Qa'im comes, he rules by the jurisprudence of Adam, he rules by the jurisprudence of Abraham, he rules by the jurisprudence of Moses and of Jesus and of Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon them. And that jurisprudence of these previous prophets and messengers allowed and made permissible the consumption of wine and alcohol. And so therefore, this is one of the things that the Qa'im is going to do after clarifying it to the people. And inshallah, it's been clarified pretty well today. And the consumption of wine is made permissible for those people whom their intellect and their hearts are complete. Thank you so much for bearing with me and for being here with me.
Thank you so much, Father. It was a pleasure.
God bless you. The honor is mine. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Father.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.